Stretching down through Brooklyn, Bedford Avenue has 3 centuries of history behind it, as diverse as the people who live along this way. I caught up with James Nevius, a New York historian who's written extensively about the city.
James, good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you. And what an appropriate place to meet. This street that I've heard vies for the longest street in Brooklyn.
That is correct. Bedford Avenue, nearly 11 miles long, runs all the way from Greenpoint to Sheepshead Bay. The street today is really the connection of multiple older streets. And once upon a time in the sort of revolutionary era, there was a town called Bedford Corners. It's long gone, but if you think of Bed-Stuy, Bedford-Stuyvesant, that area would have been Bedford Corners. And along the street, you can find everything from Polish Greenpoint to hipster Brooklyn to old traditional immigrant Brooklyn to the Hasidic community that lives along Bedford Avenue on the south side of Division, and then you move in all the way down through Bed-Stuy and eventually into really bucolic area of Sheepshead Bay.
Well, if you're okay with it, I'd love to explore just a little bit. We'll probably stay in Williamsburg.
That would be great.
So we don't have to walk too far.
I understand.
I'd love to explore a little bit of the street with you.
All right.
It's not long before James spots a remnant of Bedford Avenue's history, the original name given to the street in 1802.
So when Bedford Avenue was first built, Williamsburg had been gridded out by a man named Williams. That's how it became Williamsburg. And all of what today are avenues were numbered streets, and it was 4th Street. The only original marker that I know of is on the side of the Bedford Avenue cheese shop where it says 4th Street carved in stone.
Another sign along the street proudly displays the name of a heroic Polish priest who helped to bring down communism, Father Yasha Popieluszko. James shows me the square and monument that was dedicated to his memory just 30 years ago.
We're right on the edge of the difference between Williamsburg and Greenpoint. And Greenpoint, starting in the early 20th century, had a large Polish Catholic population. It is one of the sort of main enclaves of Polish New Yorkers. So it makes sense that when this priest, he lived in Poland, he was adamantly opposed to the communists, he was very pro-solidarity, and in 1984 he was very unfortunately kidnapped and murdered. And just 1 year later, the Polish-American Congress lobbied to have this square renamed for him and this statue to him put up in his memory. And every year on October 19th, the anniversary of his murder, there is a commemoration here for him.
Just off Bedford Avenue is the Church of Our Lady of Consolation, established by Polish immigrants in 1909. Nearby, James stops me at another remnant of the area's immigrant legacy, the original public bath, opened in 1922.
What's so important about this building behind us, James?
In the 20th century, as the richer people in Brooklyn moved to sunnier climes, if you will, it became much more of an immigrant district, especially after the opening of the Williamsburg Bridge in 1903. So immigrants who lived on Bedford Avenue often lived in what were called cold water flats, tenement apartment buildings, no hot water, and sometimes no water at all. I mean, there were housing rights advocates from the very get-go who said that the apartments are too poor and the rents are too high and the city has to do more about this. And the city was never really willing, perhaps in many ways still isn't willing, to tackle the issues of substandard housing. So instead, you might think of a public pool like this as a Band-Aid. It's like, here we're giving you this what they call in the biz a public accommodation, so that your lives will be better, but maybe they should have been getting hot water into those apartments.
In the last couple decades, Williamsburg has rapidly become an expensive place to live. James calls it a prime example of the gentrification of Brooklyn. But just 40 years ago, the area looked quite different. Crime rates skyrocketed. The area exploded into looting and violence as the neighborhood plunged into the darkness of the blackout of 1977. James stops me at an apartment building purchased in 1976, $22,600 for the entire building.
It just sold for $6 million, 300 times the property value in that short amount of time. And Williamsburg and Bedford Avenue have really changed so much over that time. It's amazing to think that it's the same place.
Even the churches of the area have been impacted by the rapid gentrification. St. Vincent de Paul, off of Bedford on North 6th Street, was established in 1860 but closed in 2004.
Now, it's no longer a church.
It is no longer a parish. It is in fact condos. When we think about neighborhoods changing, it's not always tear down what was there and rebuild something new. It's about take what's there and see if you can turn it into something new. Now, when buildings like this get turned into condos, They're luxury condos. I mean, we're talking $5,500 a month rent for a 2-bedroom apartment.
Do you think that we're going to lose this, even the religious, the cultural history behind this area?
I think it's a real factor that could play in. As the demographics change, you're going to have institutions that serve the people. And I think what's really a danger is that if you don't have the institutions, you can't keep the people. Whether that's a church, whether that's a cultural center, whether that's a library, if you don't have the places where people can gather in a communal space, you don't have a neighborhood.
I ask James what might happen to the centuries-old stretch in the future. He tells me that this is one of the best parts of being a historian. You can study and predict, but you will never really know what will happen until it happens. Reporting for Currents from Bedford Avenue, I'm Katie Breidenbach.